March 1839, and a Chinese official named Lin Zexu is standing on the shores of Human, watching his soldiers haul 20,000 wooden chests toward the water. Each chest weighs 77 kilograms, packed tight with raw opium, imported illegally from British-controlled India, representing the lifeblood of the world's largest drug trafficking operation. 1,400 tons of opium, worth millions of pounds sterling in 1839 money. Adjusted for inflation, that's billions in today's purchasing power. And Lin orders it all destroyed. The opium is thrown into massive trenches, mixed with lime and salt to neutralize it, then flushed into the ocean as British merchants watch their fortunes literally dissolve. But here's what Lin Zexu didn't understand about drug cartels when you destroy their product. You don't end their operation. You just give them an excuse for war. 18 months later, British warships equipped with superior naval guns are systematically bombarding Chinese coastal defenses, and China cannot fight back against this technological superiority. By August 1842, the Qing dynasty has surrendered under the Treaty of Nanking, ceded Hong Kong Island to Britain, opened 5 major ports, and paid massive reparations. And here's the part they don't teach you in history class. The opium trade didn't stop after the war. It became legal and expanded exponentially. The same men who smuggled drugs for decades took their blood money and built a bank that still operates today with over 39 million customers worldwide. That bank is HSBC, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation. And its founding story is the story of the world's most successful drug cartel going legitimate. Let's rewind to 1773 and understand the economic trap that turned the British Empire into history's largest narco-state operating under the banner of free trade. The British public had developed an insatiable addiction to Chinese tea. And by the early 19th century, Britain was importing astronomical quantities of silk, porcelain, and tea. But China didn't want anything Britain was selling in return, not British wool, not manufactured goods, not technology. Absolutely nothing except one thing: pure silver. By 1820, Britain is hemorrhaging silver to China to pay for these imports, creating a trade deficit so catastrophic it threatened to bankrupt the treasury. Britain is facing potential economic collapse because Chinese demand for British products was essentially zero. But British demand for Chinese goods was through the roof. So the British Empire did what empires always do when they can't compete in a fair market. They rigged the game with narcotics. And the weapon they chose to reverse this trade deficit wasn't innovation or better products. It was industrial-scale opium trafficking disguised as commerce. Here's the criminal brilliance of the scheme. Britain controlled Bengal and India, which had perfect soil and climate conditions for cultivating massive poppy plantations. Chinese laborers and elites were already using small amounts of opium medicinally, so there was existing knowledge of the drug, just not widespread recreational addiction yet. British merchants, backed by the East India Company. I thought, what if we turned a traditional medicine into a mass addiction crisis that generates infinite demand? The British East India Company started the opium operation conservatively in 1797, selling 4,000 chests per year to private merchants. That's 308 tons. But addiction is exponential. And by 1820, they're shipping 224 chests. By 1830, it's jumped to 956 chests. And by 1836, over 30,000 chests annually. Let me translate these numbers into the reality of what was happening by the late 1830 seconds. Opium represented 57% of all imports into China, and 70% of all maritime freight traveling from India to China was opium, meaning the entire trade route had become a drug trafficking superhighway. The silver that had been draining from Britain to China, it reversed course completely, now flowing from China back into British hands at an accelerating rate. One Chinese official calculated that in fiscal 1839, Chinese opium smokers consumed 100 million taels worth of drugs, while the entire imperial government spent 40 million. They were spending more on British opium than their government spent on everything combined. And that's when the Qing emperor realized his country was being destroyed. Now let me introduce you to the real drug lords. Not street dealers or cartel enforcers, but respectable Scottish gentlemen in tailored suits. William Jardine and James Matheson founded Jardine, Matheson and Company in Canton on July 1, 1832, and chose the Chinese name Iwo, meaning happy harmony. The irony is beautiful. They named their drug trafficking operation Happy Harmony while they were systematically poisoning an entire civilization and destroying China's economy. But let's be absolutely clear about something historians often obscure. With polite language, these weren't merchants. They were architects of industrial-scale narco-trafficking backed by military force. William Jardine was a trained surgeon who studied at the University of Edinburgh Medical School, meaning he understood exactly what opium addiction did to the human body. He knew the withdrawal symptoms. He knew the long-term health effects. He knew families would be destroyed. And he simply didn't care, because profit trumped everything. The Chinese authorities gave Jardine a nickname that perfectly captured his reputation, the iron-headed old rat, the sly, cunning ringleader of all opium smugglers in Canton. Jardine wasn't offended by this name. He actually seemed to wear it like a badge of honor, a testament to how effectively he evaded Chinese law. By 1841, Jardine Matheson owned 19 intercontinental clipper ships, hundreds of smaller smuggling vessels called lorchas, and even armed boats they leased to the Royal Navy. They designed special fast ships called opium clippers, specifically engineered to outrun Chinese patrol boats and deliver drugs to coastal smuggling networks at maximum speed. Their profit margins were astronomical. Buy a chest of opium at the Indian auction for low cost, then sell it in China for double or triple. A single chest could yield over 100 pounds profit after all costs. Now, multiply that by 30,000 chests per year flowing through their network. But here's where the criminal genius truly reveals itself when Lin Zexu destroyed their opium in 1839. Jardine didn't just get angry, he weaponized it. He sailed to London in September 1839, walked straight into Foreign Secretary Lord Palmerston's office, and said, "I'll show you exactly how to crush China militarily." Jardine didn't merely suggest that Britain should go to war to protect drug trafficking. He provided a comprehensive military strategy with detailed battle plans. He gave Palmerston maps showing Chinese coastal defenses, recommended specific troop numbers and warship deployments, identified which ports to seize, and listed exact indemnification demands. He even told Palmerston to demand financial compensation for the destroyed opium, meaning China would have to pay Britain for the privilege of having their drug supply confiscated. Think about the audacity. A drug smuggler sat down with the British Foreign Secretary and wrote the British Empire's war plan, and Palmerston accepted it word for word. This is the equivalent of Pablo Escobar walking into the White House and convincing the president to invade Colombia to protect cocaine shipments. Except it actually happened. Asterisk, asterisk. The cover-up. The propaganda machine. Asterisk, asterisk. Now here's how they sold this drug war to the British public and Parliament. Because you can't just say, "We're fighting to protect heroin dealers." They reframed the entire conflict as a noble fight for free trade and civilization against backward Chinese protectionism and xenophobia toward enlightened Western nations. Jardine and Matheson hired professional writers, bought extensive newspaper coverage, and launched a sophisticated propaganda campaign to manufacture public support for war. In early 1840, best-selling British author Samuel Warren published a pamphlet called The Opium Question that portrayed the Chinese emperor as a tyrant oppressing innocent merchants. Warren's pamphlet threatened that the naval and military force of Great Britain would crush the ancient fooleries of China and give the emperor a new and astounding view. The tone was pure imperial arrogance. We're not drug dealers. We're liberators bringing the benefits of free trade to a backward nation that foolishly rejects progress. British politicians like Lord Palmerston argued publicly that the destroyed opium should be considered property, not contraband, and therefore China owed reparations for its destruction. Palmerston literally said no one could honestly believe the motive of the Chinese government to have been the promotion of moral habits, dismissing China's anti-drug efforts as lies. The parliamentary debates avoided discussing the actual morality of flooding China with addictive narcotics and instead focused on abstract principles of free trade and diplomatic insults. Some members of Parliament did object. Thomas Arnold wrote that he'd never seen a war undertaken with such combined injustice and baseness as fighting to maintain drug smuggling. But the pro-war camp won because merchants like Jardine had spent years lobbying, and Britain's economy had become dependent on opium revenues, reversing the silver drain. The First Opium War lasted from 1839 to 1842, and British naval superiority meant Chinese forces couldn't effectively resist steamships and modern artillery bombardment. The Treaty of Nanking, signed on August 29, 1842, forced China to cede Hong Kong, open 5 treaty ports, to pay 21 million silver dollars in reparations. And here's the most cynical part. China had to pay $6 million as direct compensation for the opium that Lin Zexu had destroyed in 1839. The Qing dynasty literally paid Britain for the privilege of having drugs confiscated from their territory, establishing a precedent that would haunt China for a century. The Second Opium War, from 1856 to 1860, removed all remaining restrictions, forced China to fully legalize opium, and opened even more ports to foreign trade. By 1880, China was still importing 500 tons of opium annually from Britain. But by 1900, China was producing 22,000 tons domestically because addiction had spread. Asterisk, asterisk, the birth of HSBC, laundering drug money into legitimacy. Asterisk, asterisk, March 3, 1865. Just 5 years after the Second Opium War ended, with opium fully legalized. A new bank opens its doors in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation is founded by Thomas Sutherland, a Scottish merchant who worked for the Peninsular and Oriental Steam Navigation Company between 1847 and 1857. Sutherland's company P&O had transported over 600,000 chests of opium from India to China, so he understood the business intimately. The bank's board of directors included Francis Cholmondeley as chairman and the remarkable Thomas Dent, founder of Dent & Company, a major opium trading firm. In 1839, Chinese official Lin Zexu had issued a warrant for Thomas Dent's arrest for opium smuggling, which helped trigger the First Opium War. Now, that same man is sitting on the board of directors of a bank specifically designed to finance the opium trade that had just been legalized. HSBC opened a Shanghai branch in April 1865, just 1 month after the Hong Kong opening, positioning itself perfectly to capture the newly expanded China trade. The bank's initial wealth came directly from financing opium shipments from India and later Yunnan province in China to distribution networks throughout the country. Remember, opium represented 70% of Hong Kong's trade with India at this time. So, HSBC was essentially a drug money laundering operation with banking services. The founders wanted a bank operating on sound Scottish banking principles, which apparently included accepting deposits from narcotics trafficking without asking too many questions about the source. HSBC's Chinese name translates roughly to gathering wealth, and that wealth in the early years came overwhelmingly from the opium trade that Britain had forced on China. By the 1892, HSBC had become the quasi-official government bank for Hong Kong, handling colonial accounts and issuing currency, all built on an opium foundation. James Matheson, the opium smuggling partner of William Jardine, used his drug profits to buy a seat in Parliament and purchase the entire island of Lewis. Benjamin Disraeli mocked Matheson in his novel Sybil as one McDruggy, fresh from Canton, with $1 million of opium in each pocket. But Matheson was knighted anyway. These men took blood money from destroying Chinese society, laundered it through legitimate business ventures, bought political power, and died as respected members of British high society. Asterisk, asterisk, the modern aftermath, same bank. Same business model, asterisk, asterisk. Fast forward to 2012, and HSBC is caught in the biggest money laundering scandal in modern banking history, with patterns eerily similar to their origins. The United States Department of Justice announces that HSBC laundered at least $881 million for Mexican drug cartels, including the notorious Sinaloa cartel. Mexican drug dealers designed special boxes shaped to fit precisely through HSBC's teller windows to more efficiently deposit hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash daily. Think about that detail: drug cartels custom-built deposit boxes for HSBC branches, meaning the bank's complicity wasn't passive. It was active operational infrastructure for narco-trafficking. HSBC also violated sanctions by processing $660 million in transactions for Iran, Cuba, Sudan, Libya, and Burma by deliberately hiding country identities. Between 2006 and 2010, HSBC Mexico shipped $7 billion in physical cash to HSBC's U.S. affiliate, a volume, law enforcement said, could only include drug proceeds. The bank admitted to these crimes. But here's where it gets infuriating. Not a single HSBC executive was prosecuted or spent one day in jail. Instead, HSBC paid a $1.92 billion settlement, which sounds massive until you realize it was only 5 weeks of the bank's income. The settlement required HSBC to partially defer executive bonuses during the 5-year probation period. Not even eliminate them. Just partially defer them for a few years. Assistant Attorney General Lanny Breuer justified not prosecuting by saying criminal charges might topple the bank and endanger the financial system. The too big to jail doctrine. So if you've ever been arrested for possessing a marijuana stem, your life was probably more severely impacted than executives who laundered cartel billions. The FinCEN Files investigation later revealed that HSBC continued suspicious transactions even during the probation period, making the entire settlement essentially meaningless. In 2020, leaked documents showed HSBC moved vast sums of dirty money after paying the record laundering fine, including funds for Ponzi schemes and shell companies. Asterisk, asterisk, the takeaway, the grand lesson, asterisk, asterisk. Here's what the Opium Wars really taught the world when powerful nations can't compete economically. They don't innovate. They criminalize their competition and weaponize addiction. Britain couldn't sell products China wanted, so instead of improving their manufacturing, they turned millions of Chinese into opium addicts to reverse the trade deficit. They used military force to protect drug trafficking, forced the victim nation to pay reparations for confiscating contraband, then built banks to legitimize the profits. HSBC today manages 39 million customers globally, issues 70% of Hong Kong dollars, and is ranked number 15 in the Forbes Global 2000 companies. That entire empire was built on a foundation of narcotics trafficking that killed millions, destroyed Chinese society for generations, and triggered the century of humiliation. When HSBC executives were caught in 2012 laundering Mexican cartel money, one blogger wrote, they were returning to the company's historic roots. And he wasn't wrong. The same business model, facilitate the movement of drug money, provide financial infrastructure for narco-trafficking, and when caught, pay a fine that's merely a cost of doing business. This is why they don't teach the Opium Wars honestly in schools. It reveals that free trade and civilization were propaganda covering industrial-scale drug dealing. The British Empire didn't bring enlightenment to China. They brought military-grade narcotics backed by gunboats. And they built a banking system to wash the profits clean. And that banking system still exists today. Still issues your money. Still finances global trade. All built on the bones of Chinese opium addicts from the 1800s. So next time you see that red and white HSBC hexagon logo, remember, you're looking at the world's oldest and most successful drug cartel that went corporate. They took the profits from poisoning one civilization and used it to build an empire that shapes the global economy in 2025. And nobody went to jail. That's not history. That's the blueprint.